a lot of the times the work gets done in this business, in a RevOps org, by rolling up your sleeves and getting down to the good old fashioned spreadsheets, or having to dig in deep and find that root cause that AI may be able to point you to, but it's not going to solve for you.
Welcome to Revenue Insights. We're joined by revenue leaders from some of the highest growth companies. Together, we explore how they built their revenue teams, the journeys they've been on, and the lessons they've learned along the way. Revenue Insights is brought to you by Ebsta. We're an AI-first revenue intelligence platform designed to help you close more deals, retain more customers, and forecast better. Enjoy the podcast.
Hello, everyone. And on today's episode of Revenue Insights podcast, we're thrilled to have Ian Wessel, Vice President of Revenue Operations and Strategy at Monta. With over 17 years of experience in leading RevOps teams, Ian has a deep understanding of how to drive business transformation, scale operations, and align cross-functional teams towards achieving strategic revenue goals. Having worked with companies like Intercom and Salesforce, Ian brings a wealth of experience in connecting operational work to measurable business outcomes. Today, we'll be diving into his insights on how to effectively measure ROI within RevOps and connect day-to-day projects to overarching company targets. Ian, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you guys. Very good to be here. Thanks, everyone.
So let's jump straight in, Ian. You've had an impressive career working across various different roles and industries. Can you share a little bit about your career journey and what first drew you into this new world of revenue operations?
Yeah, and I think that's actually where we should start with it, which is that RevOps itself, I think, is the realm of generalist to a degree. And, it's people who get bored quickly. It's people who love being strategic. It's people who like continuous growth and learning. Maybe also the pragmatists in a world of dreamers around the sales motion, right? I think there's a certain mentality that comes with being customer-centric, but not customer-facing all the time. And so, when I think about RevOps, obviously this career didn't exist when I started, or this job did not exist when I started my career. So I found that a lot of people that do similar roles to me, we come from diverse backgrounds. A friend of mine who is an EA is now a VP at a very prominent company in RevOps. Another one many who have come from consulting because it's a consulting skill set. Several who have come from either like project management or data science or accounting, finance. And I sit somewhere in the middle of all of those things. At the start of my career, going way, way back, I was actually doing real estate and mortgages. And my boss was a former IBMer. And he was a great mentor as well. But he basically told me, because it was around the time of the recession in the mid 2000s, don't pigeonhole yourself. Make sure you have a broad base of experience to work off of, because you never know when the thing you do won't exist tomorrow. And I think that's very sound advice for most people. But what it led me to do was kind of take these skills I've been learning from there, which is a bit about doing my own marketing, about being able to prove my own value prop to be able to sell a house or something like that. And then pivoted into understanding things like how to create a business plan, or, how to think holistically about where your numbers are at and whether or not you're sustainable in your business. So that actually drew me into public accounting, and I went to KPMG and I worked in internal audit there, which was an amazing crash course in process implementation, in getting inside dozens of companies that are at all stages, from the biggest enterprise to the ones who are about to go IPO. You really see the whole gamut of everything that's out there from that. And it also helps you see what companies do better, and then also what some companies don't do well, and it helps you make up your own decisions about where you'd like to work. So when I got out of public accounting, I went into sales strategy and operations, which was at Salesforce, quota and capacity planning, territory planning, all the analysis that goes into those things. You can see it kind of starts building towards all these key elements of what RevOps is. Then I pivoted again into a finance and strategy role. I was doing a lot of business partnering, really trying to think like an executive about the margins, the long-term planning of the business. It's a lot of boxes that you're sort of ticking along the way. And then somewhere around that time is when this new buzzword of RevOps started to become quite prominent. And so kind of pivoting away from that, leveraging previous experience in sales ops, et cetera, I was able to kind of get involved in there. And I find it really intriguing, because then that gives you access to things like enablement and deal desk and bid management and compensation planning, and all these other little skills that you may or may not have had a chance to touch on earlier in your career. And so, like I said earlier, I think people in this kind of line of work do get bored relatively quickly. So I think it's a great place for people who need that constant energy and learning of doing something new and really racking their brain for a new solution. And so that's how I got into RevOps. That's how I got to where I'm at now. And I think that even though if I go back to the top of what I was saying, despite the fact that it wasn't a thing when I started, I always had an intention, going back to what that previous boss had said, of being able to pivot, and being intentional about the things I'm learning, and recognizing that if I just set enough of a course for myself like that, I'd probably land into something that made sense at some point. And thankfully, somebody was clever enough to come up with a term for it.
Well, no, I love that. I think what's really fascinating is most roles in go-to-market are very short-term thinking. You need to be focusing on that next deal and not be distracted by the longer-term strategy of the vision. And I think a lot of people think that they're in RevOps are really just sales admins, and they're there really as a subordinate resource to the VP sales. The real strategic roles, the ones, bear in mind, we have over 350 customers now that are using the Ebsta platform. So we engage with RevOps teams all over the place. The ones that are having the biggest impact are strategic thinkers. They're really working out, what do we got to do to make sure that numbers this time next year are materially better than what they are today, and how do we align the teams? I think one of the challenges a lot of these RevOps teams have is really getting the traction and the buy-in from the leadership team to actually make the changes rather than just getting some lip service, because they're also short-term focused on that next deal. So how have you managed to kind of rally the troops or herd the cats, as it were, in those different roles that you've had, and kind of bring everybody along on that with that vision and strategy?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think something I learned early in my career, and I think I was lucky a lot of the times to be able to get in there in this way, is that you have to have a seat at the table. And I actually had another boss who was very good in this regard, where he said, your job, if you're going to be a business partner, is always to get a seat at the table. And in order to get there, you have to be able to prove that you've got something to offer. And so I think we were going to dive into it in a little bit anyway. But if we think about the concept of what's your value prop or your ROI, I think you have to be able to prove that you've got an ROI in there. And if you want to be seen as a strategic leader, you have to be able to show that you're bringing something to the table. So obviously that can look a lot of different ways. I'd say, first and foremost, you have to bring data to a conversation, right? To be able to show something that somebody doesn't know. I think I won't be the first person to say this, but if you're doing a one-on-one with an executive, ideally you're going to always bring something there that they don't know, that they're going to walk away thinking about, right? And so I think if you bring that mentality into your team, and you also try to get them to think the same way, where you're always trying to think, what is the rock that we need to overturn, or what's the way that we need to help move the business along? That's the first and foremost part, is about that influence, right? And that's before we even start talking about processes and all the other things that you can get engaged with to prove your worth.
I think it's a fascinating point. It reminds me, when we first started on our journey here at Ebsta, we introduced what we call an engagement score, or we called it the Ebsta score at the time. And really, we found that in B2B sales processes, engagement really drives revenue. So we wanted to codify what a relationship or what engagement was. And we gave every relationship or every contact a score out of 100, and that became the engagement score. What was fascinating was we were writing this score into Salesforce for 3 years, and no one was using it. No one understood it. No one was using it, and no one was leading into it. Then we brought in some product people, and we turned that score into some graphics. So we were showing engagement over time and looking at the influence that engagement was having, and which personas engagement was having an influence on outcomes like close one or renewals or upsells. And suddenly the penny dropped. And just by turning that data point into insights, suddenly the leadership teams that we were talking to, they took notice, and they started to make changes, because they could now understand that this theoretical thing we were talking about that we understood, suddenly we distilled it down into a picture that an 11-year-old could get their heads around. And then suddenly overnight, that the overarching drive by sellers, even B and C sellers, even if they're not the A players, the overarching drive to win kind of took over. And once you show them the kind of secret sauce as to, look, this is what those top performers are doing, this is how they're engaging, or this is how multi-threaded they are when they win, suddenly the penny drops, and now they want to follow suit. And then overnight, this kind of theoretical engagement score suddenly became this North Star metric that everyone was aiming at. And the transition and the impact it had on win rates and on quota attainment was night and day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that if I go back to what I said earlier about the pragmatist in the room of dreamers, I think something I found is that well, especially in this day and age of where we are in tech, nothing is for sure anymore. As far as the likelihood of your role existing next week, next month, next year, all of those things have gotten a little topsy-turvy. But I had seen this many years earlier, even across customer success organizations and across solution engineering, other teams like that, where what was often coming up with the executives was, we have things, okay, like take CSMs. A lot of companies these days have this feeling that customer success is our number one value, right? But then you'll get an exec who goes, wait a minute, I'm paying for an awful lot of CSMs. How do I know whether or not these CSMs are worthwhile? It is something similar with solution engineering, where you could get up at a sales kickoff and you'd have an AE up there giving a success story, and they'll bring up the SE next to them. They're like, I couldn't have done the deal without him. Like the SE was so pivotal in this. But then when it comes actually time to take credit for everything, they'll be like, except for it was also my exceptional salesmanship that got this done. And so there's this element of how do you prove whether or not that SE was the difference maker within there. And so to your point about bringing the data to life, one of the most interesting things I think I've ever been able to show was that we were able to prove down to the activity and the number of activities that you could do and at what point you needed to do them in a cycle to actually show where you were more likely to win. And one example I brought up before in my life is that we found that if you did like 5 hours of discovery, and these are very large deals that I'm talking about here, minimum, 10 to 20 million deals, huge deals. And if you didn't do at least 5 hours of discovery before you got into any other part of your cycle, there was no chance you were going to close that deal. And the deals that had 1 or 2 hours where people thought they had filled in MEDPIC or, whatever methodology they were using, that didn't really move the needle. You needed to get in there and really dig down deep into everything that was related to that. And that's what we were able to show the solution engineers were doing. They were able to understand the things that were required in there. And then we were able to put this on a graph that basically showed, here's the bubbles that showed the deals where we did more of this at this point in this stage. And here's the ones where we didn't. And you put that in front of an executive and there's no room to argue because it's so clear. And if you can get that kind of win out of your data, I think that's really where it comes from.
I think I absolutely agree. Really interesting takeaways from the data. And one of those takeaways was really looking at opportunities that had closed lost in the last 12 months. And we found nearly a third of opportunities that had closed lost at late stage. When we reanalyzed the call recordings associated to the discovery phase, we found that the customer wasn't actually in a sales cycle. We hadn't qualified them well enough to even leave that discovery phase. And so while you may have had things recorded in the system as close lost at stage 5, you've got at least a third of those deals that actually were never really in a sales cycle. And what excites me most about this revenue operations space is there is so much inefficiencies here. If you go and talk to a finance business or traditional organizations, oil and gas, energy, whatever it might be, you start talking to them about 1 or 2% increase in productivity, they will bite your hand off. And we're living in a world where 75% of the work our sellers do doesn't lead to an outcome, or positive outcome at least. So there is so much inefficiencies in the way sales teams are operating, and so much opportunity to have a big impact. And with the data now being available to all, those companies that are leaning into those insights and the data are the ones that are accelerating away from their competitors.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I guess to that point, if you're going to try to be data led and you're going to try to get out there in front of the business to tell them what they need to know, maybe one of the biggest challenges I found in there is that you really have to have alignment to your executive level in order to push towards the things that matter most. So I think you kind of mentioned there something that I would interpret as, kind of the noise in the system. You have to get past the noise in the system. I think we oftentimes come across constantly changing priorities, right? And I think that's one of the biggest struggles for any RevOps team right now is that, especially the smaller the company you're in. I think the smaller company you're in, the priorities change more often, you pivot more often. There's always a sense of, you're always behind no matter what you're doing. A lot of people use the, you're building the plane while you're flying it analogy. I'd say that's very true. And so I think what we have to do in this space is also kind of control that narrative to a degree to make sure that the things that we're doing day to day, the things we prioritize, do align to some sort of vision of what people are looking for, what they expect the business to do in the next 12 months, next 24 months. And that maybe ruthless prioritization is the key to that, and constantly checking in, again, having that seat at the table, being able to have that connective talk with them. even before you put the data down, you have to know what you're aiming towards. So which KPIs matter, which goals are really the ones that you're after. And then underneath that, there's going to be 50 other things that need to be done to move that. So if it's win rates, it's not like you just say, oh, let's improve win rates. What does that mean? There's a dozen metrics underneath there. So what are the projects you're going to do to move win rates forward? Or even what you said there about the number of opportunities that you're losing late stage because they didn't do the groundwork. Okay, so what's your plan behind that? Are you going to run an enablement motion on it? Are you just going to do data hygiene? Are you going to make more rigorous deal reviews? Like what's your lever that you're going to pull? And I think all of those things go back to the role of RevOps needs to be there to help and inform on where we have the opportunity to make the move, but also to correct maybe some misinterpretation of what is the root cause. Because a lot of times it could just be like, oh, well, they said it's because they don't have enough accounts. Is that really the issue? Or is the issue that they didn't actually work the accounts to the level that you want them worked?
I think that's really true. And I think one of the dangers that we live in this GTM kind of space is that sometimes the people with the loudest voice aren't necessarily the most educated or with the most knowledge. And they're telling that some of these leaders are dictating policy or strategy based on gut feel. And I think what we're able to do is give them the data, give them the clarity, and really help them. We're the experts in the room here. And so, arguably, we should be in a place where we're reaching a consensus and we're leading the charge as to what could have the biggest impact. And a really great stat from last year's data was we looked at that actually most organizations actually generated more new revenue from existing logos last year than they did from their new business team, from new logo team. And then when we dive into that in a bit more detail, we start looking at the personas that they're engaging with through their QBRs. And we found that if the last 2 QBRs before the renewal are happening with the C-suite, you're now 7 times more likely to get your cross-sell or upsell opportunity. However, if you do the last 2 QBRs before the renewal with someone more junior, they're 4 times more likely to churn. So just understanding that data means that we can start to monitor which personas we're engaging with. And if we don't get the right engagement with the right stakeholder, we can escalate it internally and get maybe one of our own C-levels to engage with the customer and see if they can get them re-engaged. At least if they're not willing to engage, it's giving us a really good indicator there might be a problem there and it's something we should address before that renewal comes up. So there's so much beautiful data and insights. We just need to unlock it and get it in front of the right people and help them to make the decisions as to what we should strategically focus on moving forward to have the biggest impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. So many more questions, if I may.
Yes.
When we think about RevOps, often you're working across multiple functions within the business. So sales, marketing, customer success teams. So how have you found, are there any secrets you can share with us as to how you align those teams and ensure their efforts are contributing to this overarching kind of revenue goals for the company?
There are many different ways of approaching it. I think what's important in this role is that you always have that customer-centric view. I said that at the top of this, but I'll reiterate it because maybe one of the things I gained most from Salesforce was the idea that the customer has to be at the center of everything. And if a company doesn't have written in their values somewhere about how they're thinking about their customer, for me, that's a big red flag. And so I take that personally into my role, which is even if we're not at a place right now where we're able to do all the things we want to do to make the customer journey or the customer experience exactly what we want it to be, it's our goal that we create the foundations for that, to create that pre-sales, post-sales handoff. And somebody once said to me, the relationship between pre-sales and post-sales should be a hug, not a handshake. And I really love that one. I use it regularly because what happens so often, as you know, is you end up selling something that immediately becomes what I'll call a red account or a problematic account the day after you sold it because there was no check in between there. And I think it's something that does crop up even when you don't want it to, even if you think you've got all the processes in the world, these things still happen. But, some of the basics you can operate under are, make sure you do deal reviews on any of the large deals because those are the ones most likely to have a product issue. They're the ones most likely to have some custom build required for them or something along those lines. Get the people in the room beforehand. Most of the time you will find that depending on the size of the company, either your C-suite or at least your sales executive layer, they're going to be willing to sit in the room and hear about what's going on at deal because it gives them deal control. It lets them know exactly where things are at and they get to hear from the ground, where are the AEs struggling in a certain way. And then from a post-sales or a product side, you have to have them in the room as well to hear because then they're all going to triangulate right there and figure out whether or not there's an issue. So it's a really simple thing to do. You cut your line wherever it is, all deals over X size, and every quarter you commit to doing those. I used to see it done in, one of the biggest enterprise businesses in the world for selling. And they were doing that on a weekly basis per region, just to cover all of it. Usually in that case, they were even led by CSMs, but it can just as easily be led by a salesperson, depending on which side of the business you're doing. And so I think that's one of the greatest tools that we have. And it's something where we just play that role to make sure that we're getting all the right people in the room.
Yeah, I absolutely buy into that. Getting the right people in the room, having the right questions to ask as well. We need to move away from walking into a pipeline inspection meeting and just hearing the blah blah from the seller about how great they are and how much they love them and how they're definitely going to buy. None of that's relevant, right? What we need to really understand is, how is this deal pacing against deals that closed one that look similar to that in the past? How multi-threaded are we? How much engagement is going on? How well are they qualified? And understanding these different, which stakeholders do we have on our side that multi-threaded with which stakeholders at their side, and really getting under the skin of where are we versus where we should be, and then giving the seller the real clarity as to what's expected over the next 7 days for them to keep ownership of this account. And I think that consistency, I suppose the word consistency is something that we drill into all of our customers. More often than not, what we find is that organizations have got kind of 20+% of their reps hitting quota consistently. And then you have this kind of long tail. Now the 20% hitting quota consistently tells us they've got product market fit. The reason for the long tail is everyone's doing things differently. And so what we need to do is really help them understand what good looks like. And what's remarkable is how quickly, within the quarter, you can see a transformation once people understand what's expected of them, because they all want to win and work down that road. So I think there's this huge opportunity there. And I think, data, insights, technology, these are all things that we can use to really highlight that. So as we talk about technology and tools, they're playing an even more significant role as we move forward in tracking performance and measuring ROI in RevOps. What tools do you lean into, or technologies do you rely on to track the success of your initiatives and connect them to that measurable business outcomes?
So I'm currently really on a mission towards enablement at the moment, because I think something I've learned deeply in the last year or so is, if you go and hire a sales team and put them out there and into the world and say, sell, to your point, you're going to get, even if you have 10 salespeople, they're going to sell 10 different ways unless you tell them how to do it. And, if there's maybe one thing I wish I had done earlier in my career, it would have been to lean into enablement and really learn about that function and how to drive it. Because I think that's the one thing I would like to see in my future, is that anywhere I walk into, we have that enablement function set up before we go hire all the salespeople, or before the CSMs, any of the pre-sales or post-sales people. And then you provide the materials before they get there that says, this is the way that our business does this, right? And so to that point, something, a really good content management system like a HighSpot or a Seismic, super important to be able to corral all the information. Also, if you can get a digital sales room environment in there like that, which HighSpot has, then you can use that to see what's being shared, what's coming back from the customer, whether the customer is engaging with it, if your content actually lands, all those kinds of things. You couple that with Gong or another service like that, where you can hear back the calls, take your transcripts, pull out the keywords with AI, figure out what's being consistently said and what's not, tie that to your wins and losses, tie that to your deal size, figure out whether or not your message is landing, whether or not you've even found the right ICP. All of those things can come out of just that enablement function. And so I know Gong is not an enablement tool in itself, but if you use it like one, I think it's one of the most valuable you've got, because it really is your real-time feedback from the customer.
Yeah, no, I absolutely buy into that. One of the things we did last year was extend our proposition so that we could digest the last year's worth of Gong calls, so we can understand what's actually been said and who's qualifying well and who's not. So, taking those transcripts and throwing AI at it, we're able to extract out, which competitors are getting mentioned more often than not, or what objections are being raised and how well are we doing with dealing with those objections. And it's incredible once you kind of turn that data into insights and make it easy for the team to digest. Suddenly it becomes clear what everyone should work towards. And we ended up with a kind of a green thumbs up or a red thumbs down on qualification. And what was amazing was a lot of energy went into training people on Medic or MedPick or BANT or Spiced over the last year or two. And actually, as a general rule, we did quite well in telling people how to do this stuff. But there is a world of difference in working out how to train the sellers on how to ask the right questions, and then recording the fact that they've asked the right questions or what the outcomes were back in the system of record. And so by taking away that burden and using technology and AI to extract the information, you've got a much more consistent approach to capturing the information. And really now it's turned into a bit of a game for the reps because they all want the green thumbs up. Yes, I qualified the customer well enough. I'm allowed to lead this stage. And I think stage gates and triggers are one of the biggest challenges we see. Most people don't have the right stages anyway, but I don't think we ever come across an organization where the gates and triggers are policed correctly and people aren't skipping stages or moving back and forth through the stages. And if you don't have that in place, the reporting, the analysis, it just becomes 10 times harder. So, one of the things we encourage people to do is simplify your stages and then get really ruthless about the stage progression. I'll be very clear about how multi-threaded or which personas need to have engagement and how much engagement is required before they're allowed to move through, or how well we need to qualify them. So, absolutely buy into everything you're saying there.
Yeah, maybe to the point you made there, though, I think all the frameworks are always great. You need a framework; it's good to have it, but you can't use that as the only way that you go about it. And what I mean by that is I think RevOps people are often accused of death by process. We love to put in process, just create 50 more fields in the CRM and everything's going to be fine. Make everybody fill it in. And then we're all going to have a great day, right? Because then we've got all the data that tells us exactly what you're doing well and where you need to work on it. But as you know, that just angers everybody. The more fields you add, the more mandatory admin they've got to do, the worse it gets. So going back to that idea of using, the calls and those other things that come out of that, coming in and doing it from a training perspective, I actually think is a much softer and kinder way of getting the exact same result, which is if you can come in and say, let's listen to your call and do one-to-one coaching or whatever with the reps if you can, and if you say, let's listen back on that and let's hear what you said here, and then kind of do treat them like a salesperson, ask them the open-ended question about, how does that feel there? Like where did you do well? Where didn't you? And then when you can kind of then tie it back to the other day that you got to go, look, on the deals you've won or the deals that others have won around here, these are the things that we made sure we said. What is that over here? And then you can kind of tie that back. Then you don't really have to be like fill in MedPick. That's not the goal. The goal is not to fill in MedPick. The goal is get the information you need to serve your customer the right way.
Absolutely. And the AI is so much more consistent anyway. If it happens to be the last meeting of the day and you've got half an hour before you go home, you're going to fill that in beautifully, right? But if you're going back to back, you might put in one word at a time. And so allowing the AI to have this kind of consistent approach to filling in the data and giving, and then turning that into kind of data points and insights and scores means it's really distilled down to things that people can understand, and they're not having to worry about the admin anymore. All they need to do is focus on delivering value to their buyer. So I absolutely buy into that, and it's kind of become part of the ethos that we're focused on. Thinking about, we're obviously at the market, we see the market moving at pace, but one of the challenges we see is, how do we ensure that the impact of RevOps initiatives on customer success and sales versus the overall revenue growth is adequately reflected and communicated to the stakeholders that we're engaging with? Because more often than not, the people running these departments, they just don't understand how much value and how much support we can give them.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to what I was saying earlier about the ROI thing, improving ROI. I mentioned earlier the CSMs and the SEs and how, even though they're always up on stage and they're customer facing and they get the plaudits, how much more difficult is it when you're not customer facing? You are not an obvious revenue generating engine, right? But even though everybody in the org might say we couldn't do it without RevOps, RevOps are amazing, they do all these great things for us, it is very, very hard to prove the value of your org, especially when headcount is on the line. And if you feel like you're overwhelmed, you need more. How do you prove that another headcount is actually going to matter for you? And so when it comes to what you're asking there, my thing is, I'll go back to what I said about having you have to have that seat at the table, first of all. But then from there, it's about aligning to the KPIs and the goals of the company, like I said. And then from there, it's about driving it down into your projects. And then maybe the last step of that, the most important one, is the feedback loop. So if you've done a really good job, you've taken, let's say your KPI is to just grow revenue. So you grow your ARR, a nice simple one, right? Nothing behind that. So then that's your goal. Okay, what are the main activities your group is going to do to contribute to that? Everybody in your team is contributing to that in some way. Your enablement team contributes to it. Your bid manager contributes to it. Your deal desk function contributes to it, because all of you are in some way or another either pushing things forward or you're a gatekeeper for something else that's happening. But then at the end of that, how do you prove that you actually grew ARR, or how do you prove that you move the win rate forward? You have to say and make sure that you advertise out there here's the projects we're working on for the quarter. Get that buy-in and that alignment from your primary stakeholders. And then say, here's the KPIs that we associate with that. And here's what we think the impact of that will be. And then you have to close that feedback loop after. And if you can build that into an automatic function, the way you think on a quarterly basis and on an annual basis, then you're driving a couple of things. One of them is consistency, like you said, but the other is accountability. I'm really into driving accountability amongst to myself, to my team, to all the salespeople. I want everybody to feel accountable. I want them to feel like what they're doing contributes to the greater good of the org, and that it's contributing to their own welfare as well, as far as how they progress their career or how they hit their number and get paid, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, and maybe it's the thing I still have to work on most in my life, is when we finish something, I think we're most guilty of being like, wipe your hands of it. We finished that project. Let's move on to the next one, because we have to move so quickly. Taking the time to go back and summarize this for everybody and say, hey, remember when we said we were going to do X and it was going to move the needle on this? Here's how much it did. We're going to keep tracking it and we're going to keep iterating on it. Now, that doesn't mean it needs to be another massive project next quarter, but it's an iterative process now, and you have to keep those things going. And that's the thing I'm constantly striving to get better at, and making sure that we do that feedback loop and that we report back on it, and then get some feedback and then iterate.
I love that. I love the idea of if you commit to agreeing to, if you commit to taking on a new project or focusing on a particular thing, almost booking in the post-mortem in 3 months' time, so everyone knows it's in the diary, and you know that you're going to have to deliver back kind of a summary of whether we were successful or not. You know, bluntly, this is what we did and this is what happened. I think having that discipline is absolutely key, and that's something I'm going to take away from our conversation. So finally, looking ahead, how do you see the role of RevOps evolving over the next 3 to 5, especially with this increasing reliance on AI and automation in sales and customer operations?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. One is there's maybe a worry that we become too much of a jack of all trades, and also that we do too many roles at once. So I think there's certainly a concern there that if everything just keeps getting piled into the space of RevOps, it actually will lose its fidelity to some degree, right? So I think that's a concern that we need to be aware of. I also think that the use of AI is obviously amazing, and everybody's out there touting how all the wonderful things they're doing with AI. But I also think that means there's this expectation around efficiency that comes from that also may not be totally realistic. A lot of the times the work gets done in this business, in a RevOps org, by rolling up your sleeves and getting down to the good old fashioned spreadsheets, or having to dig in deep and find that root cause that AI may be able to point you to, but it's not going to solve for you. And so I still think the role of RevOps is evolving to figure out how much should we actually own and how much, is really on our plate. I would say that we need to get to a place where it becomes a manageable role for all companies at all sizes. You can't just say you have a RevOps leader in a giant enterprise business and expect that means the same thing as RevOps leader in a startup. And right now, I'm not actually sure where that goes. I'd love to get your opinion, actually. Where do you think that goes?
We spent a few days away to try and think about this a lot because, frankly, I'm running a software business in the RevTech space, right? So are we going to get gobbled up by AI? Is that going to be, the end of the business, or is it a big opportunity? And of course, inevitably where we landed was on opportunity. I think what hit us is that in a world of AI, data quality and fidelity is so important. And when we started in business, our first product is what we currently call relationship intelligence. And that's really just about fixing the underlying data in Salesforce using a feed from mailboxes, calendars, phone systems, and so on. And that's become even more important. We get customers buying that now without buying the rest of what we do, just because they need to know that they've got an engine being responsible for logging the contacts and the activities in the system of record, auto scoring engagement, and so on. So that for us is a key differentiator that we love. And I think on the other side, I think I mentioned, we've recently launched a services wrapper around our technology, because actually developing dashboards for pipeline inspection and forecasting is not the biggest barrier to entry in the world. But when you blend that with data and insights, and then you deliver a service to help customers to kind of understand the data and be able to turn it into actionable steps, and then every quarter engaging with them to see, how are we doing on those key metrics? Suddenly that services wrapper just unlocks the value for the customer. So I think businesses that are those kind of pure play software businesses in complex places, they're going to struggle. Because the barrier to entry on software is getting lower and lower and lower. I think those that are really kind of blending data, insights, technology, and service are the ones that are going to help their customers achieve the outcomes they're aiming for a whole lot quicker. But actually, it builds a moat around your proposition, because you're actually building, even in 2025, relationships are still driving revenue. So maintaining those relationships, helping our team to spend more of their time engaging with real people, to me is kind of the secret sauce.
Yeah, I guess maybe I would say more what I like the ideal state to be around RevOps. And it would be getting to that place where we're the strategic leader and we are using AI and all of these tools that we have out there to kind of save us from all of those things. But I don't know if you were familiar with the company Roblox. They recently went under, sadly. But their CEO at the end kind of gave his own postmortem of, what went wrong. And I'll paraphrase it by saying, essentially, I think we overestimated how strategic RevOps were viewed in the space of the company, when a lot of the times they just need to get things done and they're not actually in the space to be the strategic leader that we expect them to be. And that's where I would like to see us move ourselves along, is how do we make sure we're always able to do that prioritization, to get into that room that we need to get into, and to make sure that we're driving the business forward with the right insight and to be strategic about it, rather than just what's the next tactical thing we need to do tomorrow?
Yeah, and you see it. I mean, as I say, we've got 350 customers on the platform, and businesses that have got what they call RevOps, but really as sales admins, versus those that really have invested in that strategic approach and are long-term thinking in go-to-market. They're accelerating away from their peers. And so it's, in a way, it's such a great return on investment when you really start to dive in and invest in RevOps and the data. But so look, I'm really excited, and maybe we can revisit this again in a year's, Ian, and see kind of if any of our predictions were true. But if any of our community want to engage with you directly or reach out to you, how would they do that, Ian?
I suppose LinkedIn. I guess that's the best mechanism these days, right? We don't actually do emails or anything anymore, right? So LinkedIn it is.
So they can find you on LinkedIn, and it's Ian Wessel, Wessel. So reach out to Ian, mention the podcast. I'm sure he'll be happy to take your questions directly on LinkedIn as well. So Ian, thank you so much for joining us today. So many insights, and we could go on for another hour, I'm sure. But thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to following your career as you progress.
Cheers. Thank you so much, Guy. I appreciate the time.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to Revenue Insights from Ebsta. If you want to learn more from some of the brightest minds on how to predictably and efficiently grow revenue, then subscribe to our newsletter. We'll deliver actionable insights straight to your inbox. Go to ebsta.com/newsletter. See you soon.